Good evening and welcome to the Burnsville Parks and Natural Resources Commission meeting for September 18, 2017. Our first item of business is to approve the agenda. Are there any commissioners that would like to add or adjust anything on the agenda?
Nope.
Seeing none, do I have a motion to approve?
I motion to approve the agenda.
Thank you.
18th.
And do I have a second?
second.
Thank you. All in favor?
You? Aye.
Aye.
And it is so moved. Thank you. The second item is for citizen comment. Do we have any citizens that would like to address the commission this evening? Seeing none, we will move to the third item of business, which is to approve the minutes of the previous meeting held on July 17, 2017. Commissioners, is there anything you'd like to add or adjust on the previous minutes? Anything from staff?
Commissioners, I would just like to point out that there were no minutes taken from our August Parks Tour meeting. That was less formal, and there was no minutes to be had from that. So July is our last meeting date.
Thank you for the clarification there. Do I have a motion for approving the minutes? Okay, and a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye as well, and it is so moved. That brings us to the fourth item, which is to review the Parks and Recreation System Master Plan.
Good evening, Commissioners. Tonight I'm joined by our consultant, Brad Aldrich from Confluence, and he is going to do the majority of the work here tonight, the majority of the presenting. I'm simply going to introduce the topic tonight. So the presentation tonight, I'm going to give you a quick project history. We're going to review a draft of the master plan. That's the legwork that Brad's going to take care of. And then when we get to the end of that, we're going to talk about our next steps and where we go from here. So to start off, and Brad will walk you through it again, but the purpose, or the city has an excellent park system, and we're doing good work, and you'll see that as Brad presents. However, it is essential that that we continue to do the work that we're doing here in the Parks Master Plan is essential for the physical, economic, and environmental health of our residents, that we have these things in place and we have such a quality park system. And even though we have a strong foundation of parks and recreation, this updated master plan will assist us in the ongoing maintenance and care of our existing system and existing programs. It will also help us keep pace with our changing demographics in the community and help us keep up with new trends in recreation over the next 15 to 20 years. This is the third master plan that the city has taken on. In 1991, the first master plan was created. It really set the vision and the plan for our park system that you see today. Much of that park system that we have is the legwork that was done back in 1981. In 2000, the update or the master plan that was created then was really done with a focus on maintenance and enhancements to our park system. And then this is obviously our third master plan. It really takes into account that our system is mature at this point, and we have very little room for growth in our park system, yet we do have some changing needs and trends in parks and in recreation. So it is all a big, ongoing, ever-flowing process, and we're in the middle of that. And as you know, Commissioners, what you've read before in the master plan, that information will be extracted and pulled out and put into the 2040 comp plan, and you will see that information at our October 23rd work session meeting. So part of what you'll see here tonight, you'll see again in just another month or so. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Brad Aldrich from Confluence, and he is going to walk you through really the nuts and bolts of the master plan that you've had a month to take a look at. So, Brad Aldrich.
Thank you, JJ. Thank you, Commissioners. It's great to be back and talking about your great park system and the work that I know you guys have contributed to in the past that we've had a couple work sessions on. So I'll go through this Relatively briefly, and if you have any questions for myself or JJ or Garrett, I see slid in here, then we'd be happy to answer any of those. The update that we're going to talk about includes, these are the kind of the main sections that we worked on, and one is just a park system overview. What is in the park system currently? What does it provide for the residents? The second part is a community assessment. That's where we take a look at the community that's using the park system. What are the demographics? What are the projections? How is the city growing? Is the city growing? What are some of the recreational trends in the state and also in the region that are going to impact the park system? 3 is the community vision. I know we talked a lot about that last time. What do the residents of Burnsville want to see their park system look like, and what is the vision that they want to see it look like? And is that changing from what it's been in the past? Number 4, the system analysis. This is what we had a sub-consultant that looks at national park systems help us kind of compare Burnsville to other park systems within the metro and within the state that are comparable, and see how is Burnsville stacking up, and how are we meeting the needs of the residents. And then we'll spend the most time on the frameworks plan, and this is what we came up with staff to kind of guide Burnsville into the future, and this will probably be the tool that they use most to sort of structure improvements, capital improvements in operations and maintenance. Oop. So park system overview, I think you know your park system pretty well, and I think what we found is that it is a great park system, as JJ mentioned. It's a very diverse park system. There's a lot of different types of spaces and elements and amenities, and I think the natural resources is really a powerful sort of differentiator of Burnsville parks from other parks that are in the region and in the metro. And I will say that in a couple of stakeholder groups that people did point out that, a few different people pointed out that the park system actually was an important part of their decision to move to Burnsville, and I think that's important to note now and moving into the future. The community assessment. We looked at demographics of Burnsville and kind of projections into the future, and we found that, like a lot of cities in the metro, it is growing slowly. The city's population is aging. I think that's important to note when we start to get into the frameworks plan. The city's population is also diversifying. Again, I think that's another critical component that the park system can adjust to into the future. And I think we looked at different incomes as well, and we're a little surprised to learn that there is a range of incomes that are below the poverty line. There are also quite wealthy populations within Burnsville as well. So I think there's a range there, and I think that will come back up again in the frameworks plan with some of our recommendations. And then the community vision. What does Burnsville want to see the park system look like in the future, and how do they like it now? What do they like about it? What don't they like about it? This is where we went out and talked to people. And this is just sort of a breakdown of the methods and means that we use to get people's input. So we had 10 stakeholder meetings. This is where we really focused on staff, on the senior center population, on youth. We talked to the Lions Club members and various people that use the parks a lot and that know the parks and know what they want to see improved and what they like about it. The public intercepts, we had 150 people that we reached through those, and those were going to events like the fire muster, like the parade, like the open house, and talking to people, and we had our boards out there, and they, kids mostly came for the candy, but they stuck their little dots on and told us what they liked about the parks and what they didn't like about it. And then lastly, we had an online survey, and we had over 650 people that filled that out as well. So we feel like we got a pretty good cross-section of the population of Burnsville. And overall, again, people really like the parks, and that's kind of the general sentiment. There's some room for improvement, of course, as always, but generally, the park system is liked. This is just a little snapshot of who participated in the surveys, and you can see we got a pretty good range of people, age ranges. We were a little worried about the underage 18 crowd, but we kind of had a late push with some help and from Olivia, and we got some help from the high school and got some of the surveys out, and that really helped, I think, bump it into something that we felt comfortable that we were getting good results for. The race of participants is, over 80% white. This is really something that we really tried to target. I think we had some success, and I think we started to kind of build some inroads maybe with some communities for future engagement to continue that, and some of our recommendations reflect that as well. the community vision, some of the, the online survey themes that we had that kind of came up strongly were trails and connections. Trails are really kind of a top priority for people. There is a good trail system here, but there's also a really great trail system in the region, and people want to be able to connect to that. They also want to be able to connect internally in Burnsville to their parks, their local parks. Some of the major roadways are barriers for people connecting to those parks. Natural resources, again, this is a unique piece of Burnsville's park system. People either really love it or they don't use it as much, and I think that's some of our recommendations are trying to figure out how we can get people to use the natural resource areas a little bit more and maybe help them understand how valuable they are and what they can use them for, because they might not know that. And there were a lot of comments just about basic amenities and services, like having recycling and kind of dog park areas and enough benches and shade for people to kind of go, and kind of simple things that I think can make a big difference in people's everyday experience using the parks. So the fourth thing we did was look at systems analysis, and this is where we really compared Burnsville's park system to other park systems and really tried to figure out kind of quantitatively how is it stacking up, where are the areas for improvement. And we looked at it in three different ways. We looked at first the physical infrastructure, and then we looked at the program delivery, how are programs being delivered, how are people using the programs, and then operations, not only for programming, but also taking care of the parks, and then marketing the programs as well. All those things sort of added up to our systems analysis. So the first part of that was the physical infrastructure, and one of the main elements is the level of service. And this is a really kind of detailed chart, but basically what this is showing is some of these main facilities that are in the parks, that are in a lot of community parks, like the trails, warming houses, ball diamonds, things like that. And then also just in general, the parkland in general. Is there, comparable to other cities and national averages, does Burnsville have enough parkland to meet the sort of level of service that should be expected if you're a Burnsville resident? And where you can see that in most cases, yes, Burnsville does meet the standard. You see a few red items in here that say needs exist, and those are under mini pocket parks, neighborhood parks, neighborhood parks and natural areas. But I think the thing to kind of look at here is the total park acreage, and if you look, Burnsville has 1,714 acres, and that definitely meets the national average. So I think it's when we get over to defining what these parks are, that's where we're sort of kind of getting into a sort of a trading game. Natural areas, we know Burnsville has a ton of natural areas. It's just how they're defined is kind of what's eating up this chart. So I think that's something to keep in mind as looking forward. So we look at the current needs, and then you also look at the projected demographics 5 years out into the future and 15 years out. And I think things look pretty good across the board. We also looked at benchmarking, and this basically takes Burnsville and compares it against other cities in the region. We also have kind of one outlier here, West Des Moines, which we felt was a really good comparison. It's a very similar type of city, similar type of population and demographics. And as you can see, Burnsville kind of lines up right in the middle of all of them. I think other cities kind of have stronger elements in some areas and weaker in some areas, but Burnsville kind of across the board lines up in the middle. One thing I do want to point out is that bottom row, trail miles per 1,000 residents, we highlighted 0.93 miles, and that meets the national average, but we are recommending, you'll see coming up, that Burnsville kind of looks at this trail mileage, because if you notice your sort of neighbors and friendly competitors to the left of that chart, Eagan, Plymouth, Lakeville, some of those are double the number. And I think that is an important element that people really gravitate towards. The next thing we looked at was how programs are being delivered. And I think this is a good summary of sort of the mix and the types of programs that are in the city. And the only thing to note here really is that I think Burnsville has a good mix. But we like to see the distribution kind of on the bottom of 0 to 10% of the programs that are in saturation or decline. These might be older programs that were really popular at one time, but just have lost popularity over time for whatever reason, and they're just not growing or kind of keeping their numbers up. So we like to see it in the 0 to 10% range, and here we're in the kind of the 12 to 16% range. So it's not that that far off, but something to keep in mind when maybe we should try to come up with newer programs that maybe reach the current demographics of the city a little more frequently. And then lastly, we looked at operations. And I think there were no kind of surprises there. I think Burnsville sort of operations and maintenance, people recognize when we talk to them that the parks are well maintained, and I think that kind of matches with what we saw with staffing numbers. And I think the one thing that kind of Burnsville has going for it is it has a really great volunteer program that's already working for it, and that helps, especially with the natural areas, kind of help maintain those. It's kind of a unique element. So I think that's great, and that should be fostered. Communications and marketing is one place that we heard from in stakeholders, and looking at some of the elements that we feel could be a place for improvement, and that isn't a knock on communications and marketing. It's just a way we feel that you could connect to all of the residents of Burnsville and really kind of make it the park system great for everyone. And we have some ideas in the frameworks plan, which we're going to talk about next. So I mentioned before, I think this is something that we worked really closely with staff to develop, and it's really going to be the kind of major tool that they're going to use going forward to kind of update the park system and make sure that it's meeting the goal, which is enhancing the community through people, parks, programs, and facilities. And we broke down the frameworks plan into kind of 10 different focus areas, and we have different recommendations and strategies within those focus areas, and we'll kind of go through each of these right now. Excuse me. So the high-quality natural areas, this is one of the key elements of Burnsville. We thought it should be right up there. And I think maintaining those, number one, is where we need to start. And that's, again, we just talked about the volunteer opportunities, but I think continuing to foster that, continuing to provide on-site stormwater treatment and try to improve the water features of the parks, but also the city. And then also increasing the resident use of natural areas I mentioned before. People either love it or maybe they don't understand what it's all about. So a couple of strategies to do that are increasing trail usage by kind of allowing more multi-use trails, which could allow bikes and hikers in certain areas where it's less kind of impactful. And then increasing the program and activities at natural park areas and really trying to focus on seniors and getting seniors out in safe areas that they feel comfortable with, and also youth that might not have experience with natural areas, particularly youth of different races that don't have that background, and potentially programming to help them be exposed to nature. And that might be nature-based amenities near trailheads, like a nature playground or something that would draw people that normally wouldn't come there to that area to check out the playground, and then they have this kind of whole natural playground right outside of that. And then the next sort of framework that we saw is kind of building on the trails that are in Burnsville and seeing Burnsville as a trail center and connecting to all these other trails. So continuing to provide those connections. I know there's continued work on connecting to regional trails and continuing to push the trail system. And I think that is developing kind of a variety of trails, paved, and also potentially more natural surface trails. Natural surface trails are a unique feature to Burnsville. It's something that nationally is gaining in popularity, and definitely within the state. That kind of feeds into this next one, which is foster the growing mountain bike ridership, which is really kind of exploding in Minnesota right now. And you're sort of at the epicenter of some of the nicer trails in the region, with Lebanon on one side and Murphy-Hanrahan on the other side. So a couple of ways to do that is just the multi-use trails again, and developing, really targeting kids and beginners might be a nice feature. There isn't a lot of that in the Twin Cities, and you have really nice technical trails on both sides of you, but you could really kind of focus on that and kind of make it a family activity. Those features are really popular nationwide. And then fat tire trails, which are winter riding, is really exploding in popularity, and that might be a nice feature here as well. And then encouraging new and infrequent users. Definitely different demographics aren't used to sort of the natural experience, so providing really clear signage and wayfinding is really important to make them feel safe and understand that they're not going to get lost out there, and that this trail will come back to a place that they'll be able to find their car. And making sure the high-traffic trails are always lit in the fall, winter, and evening uses. People like to go out after work, you know, kind of in those shoulder seasons, and just making sure that's safe in some of those higher, maybe it's not every park, but just kind of maybe locating particular trails that are high traffic. And then potentially providing rentals near trail centers for bikes or cross-country skis or snowshoes, just to kind of expand those elements to other populations that might want to try it out. So then we looked at basic park services, and kind of a useful sort of tool for us is to kind of map where all of these critical facilities are throughout the city, and you can visually kind of see if there's gaps or not. These rings that you're seeing are generally like a quarter mile or half mile radius, which is generally a 10-minute walk or so. And of course, there's barriers that kind of can tie into that, but I think it's a good visual sort of way to reference that. But some of these things to recommend that we recommend that Burnsville needs to keep working on, just to kind of keep those great basic park services, or to continue with the sort of ADA and the universal design, making the parks accessible and safe for everyone. There already is a great plan, and they're implementing it, so just keep it up. A couple of things we heard from stakeholder groups were the senior center really uses Nicollet Commons Park a lot, and there are some apparent tripping hazards there, I think just from normal wear and tear of the park, that they sort of highlighted. Benches, that was one thing that we heard kind of over and over again, just having benches for people to sit down and relax and enjoy the park system and the trails. Another kind of basic park service is just understanding that you have new cultures coming to use the parks, and they have different sort of elements that make them feel more comfortable and wanted. One example is having restrooms with running water at maybe some of the higher use parks, to kind of help people that really feel like cleanliness is sort of a part of their culture, and it helps make them feel more comfortable. Maybe not restrooms at all parks, but just kind of targeting the really kind of high traffic ones. And again, the benches and shade, a lot of the demographics that are kind of growing in the city really are family oriented, and they'll bring the whole family to the park and use it. So a lot of even kids were mentioning, we want a place for our grandma and grandpa to sit, in the shade so they can be comfortable, which I think is really cool. Reducing litter, we did hear that from people, and I think they're just interested in kind of installing recycling receptacles, leaving them out through the winter so they can use the park in the winter and still be sort of responsible. And then that is always an issue, just kind of basic services in every park district, but just kind of looking for opportunities, potentially through MPCA, to kind of help with that, especially the recycling program. And then the idea of including organics into the park system as well was brought up by people. And then dog owners, educate dog owners. This comes up in every city, so don't feel like you're alone, but it's the dog waste stations along the trails could help prevent potentially some of the waste and issues with that. And the leash laws and dog waste laws are always sort of in question, how those should they be enforced, how should they be enforced. But it definitely was an issue that we did hear from people. Another element of basic park services is having larger picnic tables and shelters. I mentioned before that a lot of families like to bring the whole family out to the park, and as you can see, this is a really nice park shelter, but it only fits one family or an immediate family. So potentially Lac Lavon was sort of identified as a really popular park that could really kind of use larger shelters to accommodate larger groups. And then drinking fountains, just providing more drinking fountains throughout the park system in key locations, and providing regular maintenance to make sure that they work. We looked at athletics and open spaces. Obviously, athletics, youth athletics are a big part of Burnsville's park history, and I think they'll continue to be. One of the trends that's been going on nationally and definitely within the state and the metro is the non-growth, I guess I'll say, of baseball and softball, and the massive growth of soccer. So one of the things that we feel that could be done in Burnsville, baseball and softball are still very popular in Burnsville, maybe more so than in other communities in the metro. So I don't think it's a wholesale changing over. I think you could find smaller areas to change over potentially some of the diamonds and rectangular, or diamonds to more multi-use rectangular fields that could accommodate both lacrosse and soccer, which are growing. Providing more field sport opportunities. Again, the lacrosse thing kind of comes up big. They don't really have a home here. They don't have a place where that they can meet with all the lacrosse teams and sort of store all their stuff and kind of have it be a home. And that would be really critical. Everywhere else in all the cities around Burnsville, lacrosse is exploding. It's growing here, but not at the same clip, and we feel like that might be one of the reasons why. Again, continuing to work with the school district, which is a great resource and I think a great partner to providing all these fields and needs that can be met by not only the students but also the parks. And then one thing to watch in the future is the soccer fields. As we mentioned, soccer is growing rapidly. Rose Field provides 4 soccer fields now that are used quite a bit, and they potentially could be going away either in the near or short term. So we really need to be mindful of that if we do lose those. And this is kind of that mapping that I was talking about before, and I think this is a really good example of that. If you look at the left side, you show the softball diamonds and the baseball diamonds that Burnsville has, and it's really good coverage. I mean, that area in the middle is kind of a commercial area, but there's really a great baseball field within most people's kind of general walking parameter from their house. But if you look to the right, this is showing kind of multi-use fields and soccer fields in general, and I want to point out Rose is kind of that western one. So if we lost that bubble, there would be kind of a big gap here of servicing soccer fields and those types of multi-use athletics on the west side of town. Another critical element of Burnsville is play and aquatics, and our recommendations here are just to diversify play to accommodate kind of the changing trend in demographics. And some of those things are ropes and nature-based kind of play features that are really popular, climbing type of things. And again, kind of keep pushing the ADA and the universal design and making all the parks and facilities comfortable for people of all abilities. And playground equipment to make sure that you have something for all ages. And improving splash pad at Cliff Fen, I think this one's already been worked on, so the park staff's already kind of attacking the frameworks plan here. Increasing access to water bodies, that's something we did here in a number of our groups, and that might be a dock at Crystal Lake. Canoe kayak rentals are really interested by people, by residents, and then adding additional fishing piers. It's been noted that most all the fishing piers that are out there are usually, I don't want to say overwhelmed, but used quite heavily, so that could be a potential opportunity for kind of a lower cost facility to help access the water resources. Court sports and fitness. Pickleball has always, in every community, is growing like crazy here. And I know it is in this area and in this region. We're working with Apple Valley now, and they're growing like crazy, and it's definitely needed here, especially by the senior community. They do want some access to indoor and outdoor courts, but I think just anywhere you can sort of find to fit pickleball in, I think that would be a worthwhile investment. I'm going to jump to the bottom one, though, and just kind of caution that we did hear when we talked to the schools and the athletic director that there is a really great youth tennis program in Burnsville, and tennis is actually growing here with the youth, which is, I would say, bucking a national trend a little bit. And they're sort of projecting out into the future that if it keeps growing, they're going to need some of those same resources. So what once was sort of the declining tennis, I think, is kind of reemerging here in Burnsville, which I think is interesting. It's very cool, but just something to watch, especially when you're trying to balance pickleball. Basketball is always popular. It's the #1 sport, and I think any basketball court that you could put up would be used. It's been noted that all the basketball courts and hoops that are up in town now get used quite heavily, and I think it's a great, especially among all kind of demographics, it kind of cuts across that. And then fitness park equipment is another trend that I think is could really work here in Burnsville, as well as the adult fitness, especially with the growing senior population looking for ways to stay healthy and safely. And this is kind of a newer type of equipment. It's not like sort of the 70s, 80s equipment that you might remember with the chin-up bar. These are kind of nice facilities that you can get on, like an elliptical machine that you're safe, and you can still kind of be low impact and still get a good workout. Building on the community facilities, exploring indoor facilities and recreation center opportunities. People do want to stay active in the winter, and I think looking for creative ways to create partnerships with either the YMCA or other cities in the area might be a way to approach that. And then again, reevaluating warming houses and rink use, looking at all the rinks and the warming houses. Are they really being used? Are you getting your full value from those? Are there areas where they could be consolidated? Things like that. Exploring new programs and facility improvements at the Burnsville Ice Center. People really wanted sort of an expanded time frame to go in and use for open skate. I think Burnsville Ice Center was one of the top things that people loved in the city, and just kind of finding a way to share that among all residents is a challenge, but it's a good challenge, and I think that's one of the things that people wanted to see. And then just it's an older facility, and just kind of upgrading it to maintain its use. The golf course and Ames Arts Center are again very highly loved by the public, and just kind of maintaining these facilities to the residents' expectations and finding new ways to use them. Programming and demographics, just creating new programs to kind of invite all of Burnsville's residents to the parks and help them understand what they can do to the parks. And I think a lot of that is continuing to engage with them. We started that process in this park master plan update, and I think I know Parks is interested in keeping that going. One of the things we heard a couple times, the Kids of Summer program is so popular. People are wanting it expanded hours, and I know it's for kind of a daycare almost situation in the summer, but I think that would really help kind of draw in other demographics and all people to kind of help use that if it was available. Translation materials for both online and paper marketing materials I think would be critical. And then just continuing to engage the Burnsville Youth Collaborative. I think they're a huge resource. From Olivia and I were over there, and they just had such great ideas on how to talk to people and kind of get other youth interested. I think that is a great resource that I know Julie has been working with them. That can help kind of make inroads, I think, with how we can communicate better with all families. Exploring additional revenue generation strategies. I know we talked about some of these in some of our early meetings, but food in the parks is definitely a trend in the area, and I think something that could really happen here. And it might be just kind of picking out a project or two to try out. Maybe it's just a food truck event, actually creating an event and not just kind of letting food trucks come to a particular park, but creating something that people will come to and seeing how that turns out and seeing how attractive it is. And the ultimate goal might be sort of a cafe or restaurant in a park. Those are very popular now, and a great way for businesses and parks to kind of help supplement their income. We talked to Lions and Rotary. They've been a great partner throughout the history of Burnsville Parks, and I think you should continue to kind of nurture that relationship and find ways to help them so they can find ways to help you. Parks maintenance staff, they do a great job. I know there's some concern that they continually take on more and more sort of public works related work, and I think their primary goal is to maintain the park, so I think they just want to be mindful of that as budgets are declining and shifting, making sure they have that ability. And then considering income-based fee adjustments to programs and facilities, and this goes back to that initial demographic study and looking at, we had like 24% of the families that were below the poverty line, but we also have wealthy families, and maybe there's a sliding scale. This is a pretty common approach in other communities. It's sort of a pay based on your ability to pay for some of these programs and facilities. Communications is a big potential area to really kind of help bolster Burnsville Parks and make it better. And that can be done a number of different ways. And one of the ways that could be done quickly is the signage and wayfinding plan. And that would be updating park entry and road signs. And then inner park trail wayfinding, again, is kind of helping people know where to go and feel safe. They're going to be more comfortable using the parks. And not only inner park, but also inner city. How can you get on a park trail in a park and also find a connection to a regional trail and end up in another city? develop a program to help every resident discover every park in their city. It came up sort of over and over again that a lot of people don't even know the number of parks that Burnsville has. They don't know what types of parks Burnsville has, and I think it could be a really interesting goal and strategy to try to get everybody to have an easy resource to find out, I want to go to try out snowshoeing in the winter. What park has that? Is there a resource that could be created that could easily be accessed online, that families and people could find out about that? And then providing translation for community engagement, signage, and marketing materials. I know Parks is starting to do that. I think it's great. I think that's an easy way to kind of reach out to all demographics. Develop a marketing strategy for programs and facilities. I think focusing on these incoming ethnic communities, creating a plan for the senior community members. We keep talking about online materials and something that's going to make it easier, but senior populations don't use that. They love the park program. They use it a lot. It's effective. So we need to be mindful of that and keep that sort of on the radar. Creating a plan just for general park users to find what they want to find when they're looking for it. And then developing new resources for new residents. People move here for the parks. Is there a packet or something that we can give them when they move here that will really kind of inform them of all that's great about Burnsville Parks? So that's kind of an overview of the frameworks, and JJ is going to talk a little bit about next steps.
So Commissioners, tonight we're looking for your feedback and then a recommendation to City Council. And we'll be bringing this final draft with whatever feedback you provide for us back to Council on October 3rd. And at that point in time, we'll be asking them to formally adopt and accept the Parks Master Plan at that time. And then, as I mentioned before, part of this document will be summarized and worked into the 2040 comp plan, which again, you'll be seeing that at a later date. And then from there, it's our intention to continue to work with the community, with our community groups, with anybody that's willing to share their ideas with us to help develop the prioritization for that frameworks plan, to help work with us on cost estimating. How are we going to tackle all of that work in the frameworks plan, and then also identify any funding sources we might have forward. So community involvement on this project and in the parks is far from over. So we're going to continue to do that. We think we had a great turnout. We know we had a great turnout, as you saw in the information that Brad presented. We're hoping those people will continue to come forward and tell us exactly what it is they want and how they want us to prioritize those things as we continue to make adjustments and change parks amenities that we have right now. And as Brad mentioned, some of these things that you saw here tonight, trip hazards at Nicollet Commons Park, they were identified as part of the process, but they're also identified annually as part of our maintenance plan. So we are kind of already checking some of these things off the list as we go, and we've already, as you saw in August at our parks tour, when we stopped at Cliff Fen Park, you saw how beautiful the splash pad looks now with the addition of the limestone and those other amenities that are down there now, so that people can sit in the shade and watch their children, or grandma and grandpa can sit in the shade and watch their children. So, as I said, we are checking some things off the list already, but those are items that we would be doing anyway, and we are looking forward to really jumping into this again once council has it in their hands on October 3rd. So that's kind of the progression for next steps. With that, Brad and myself will take any questions, comments, feedback, reaction, anything you might have that you're willing to share with us and with council will be greatly appreciated.
I can maybe start off with the first question. First of all, I thought it was a great proposal. I actually learned a lot through it. My one question is actually from page 66. I noticed on here that the CAPRA accreditation is mentioned on here. However, none of the communities that were benchmarked against actually have that type of accreditation except for one. So I was just wondering, what is it? Because I don't see what that's defined as. And also, is there some sort of precedent that we would have that in this type of report if our benchmark communities aren't necessarily receiving that type of accreditation?
Sure, and feel free to jump in, Garrett, but a CAPRA really means you have one of the highest quality park systems in the country, and it's a process that I know the city of Edina is looking at doing, and it kind of really sort of sets you apart. And it is a process that takes a lot of time and effort as well by staff to sort of document all of that. So I think we didn't look at that because I think the goal of Burnsville when we started out was just to have a great park system and not necessarily to be recognized by CAPRA. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think it wasn't really a sort of targeted goal from the beginning of the project.
It was not a targeted goal from the beginning of the project. CAPRA, as Brad's mentioned, is a national accreditation program through the National Recreation and Park Association, to which we do belong, and occasionally we do attend conferences and trainings and things like that through the NRPA, but that is not something that we have at this point ever pursued at any point in time is becoming accredited through the CAPRA program.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Other commissioners?
I have a question. I think it's for JJ. JJ, I was just wondering, does the city of Burnsville have any policy or process? I know a lot of times when I'm hiking in different cities and everywhere, they have like benches, memorial benches. Is that a way that we can raise funds quicker to get some benches? It sounds like everybody wants.
Commissioners, that is a great question. That is a program that we just updated the policies on that a year ago, 2 years ago. We are working with the Burnsville Community Foundation, and so those memorials in our parks, it's benches or it's trees. And we're asking folks to work through the Burnsville Community Foundation. We'll help identify the location in a park, the location around a trail, wherever that might be, so that we can add, those benches and a family member or a friend can be memorialized that way. So yes, we do have a program in place.
Great.
Thank you for the clarification. More feedback from commissioners?
I just have one more question. In the, which section was it? The level of service, I'm just curious, what's the difference between a mini park pocket and a neighborhood park? Both those areas needed some additional work.
Yeah, I mean, mini parks are, as you'd imagine, they're smaller parks that really serve kind of the core area around there. Pocket parks are they can be kind of specialized parks that are, they fill in kind of areas within a city that you wouldn't really have anything else. And neighborhood parks serve a general neighborhood. And I think something to keep in mind with those is those are sort of definitions by the National kind of Park and Recreation Board. A lot of communities that we work with kind of help come up with their own definitions. It's just a way to categorize parks for maintenance levels and for sort of amenities that you feel should be in the park system. So it's just a kind of a standard that we use, but quite frankly, we tailor it a lot. And that's why I'm not too concerned that it's a need showing, because I know there's just something, it's kind of how you sort of distribute the data in that chart. We know there's not a need for natural areas in Burnsville. And that's because one of the natural areas is categorized as a community park, one of the main natural areas. So, does that answer your question?
Okay, thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, I had a question about that as well, because the natural areas look like we could see some increase there, because it was like something like 57 acres, which was lower. I always think we could use more natural areas and green spaces. But I do like that there was an emphasis on having high-quality natural areas and a focus to increase their use. That's very encouraging.
Yeah, and I think that's something that Burnsville has kind of led the way on, and especially with the volunteer program, and the name of your group is the Parks and Natural Resource Commission, so I think that's telling.
Thank you. Additional comments and questions from the commissioners?
I would just say that reading through this, I think is a tremendous job reaching out to the different demographics and trying to obtain information that will help as far as the different ages and identifying if there's an aging population, how can we better serve them. I just think it was very well done.
Thank you.
And I'd also like to see the environmental values that I know Burnsville has reflected in the improvements as they get put in with shelters and benches, that they're sustainably sourced and eco-friendly.
That's a good point, yeah.
And if we see also increases of maybe cafes and food trucks, the additional waste that's generated from those, I would like to make sure that's properly captured with recycling and composting and trash being separated as that will increase in those areas. And hopefully a preference towards like organic ware and not plastic ware, if that's possible. And I know Burnsville published a climate resiliency guide a while ago, and I'm not sure I saw the term climate resiliency specifically in the plan, but I know that's an important goal for the community. So maybe if that's also incorporated as we go forward and interpretive waste sites are put in the city or information on the website is put up, make sure that residents know that's one of the goals of the city, and that's why a lot of the initiatives are being done the way they are.
Yeah, no, I think those are great points. Thank you. Yeah.
That was everything I had. If there's nothing else from commissioners, we are looking for a motion to approve this plan and recommend it to go forward to the city council. Do I have that motion?
I motion to approve the plan. Go ahead.
Thank you. And a second?
A second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye as well, and it is so moved. That brings us to the fifth item of business for this evening, which is miscellaneous.
Commissioners, I believe that item is mine. We've had a few changes come up in the last week with, in regards to our future meetings list. And the first one is our next regularly scheduled meeting that was originally on the calendar for October 2nd has been canceled. We are pushing that meeting back, the items on that agenda to the November meeting. But prior to that, we are going to meet in a work session at 5:30 PM on October 23rd to discuss that 2040 comp plan that we've been talking about. And then our November meeting will be held later in November, I believe it's the 23rd, with the agenda items that were originally planned for our October 2nd meeting. Commissioners, following our meeting tonight, when they turn off the lights, we are going to take a group photo because there is an upcoming Commissioner Volunteer Recognition event. Some of you have been to this event before. It's held over at the Ames Center. And then their last item there, it is scheduled for Tuesday, October 17th from 4:30 to 6 PM in the upper lobby of the Ames Center. And they would like to make sure we have a photo of this commission accounted for as they're recognizing all of the groups that volunteer to serve the community. So please stick around after the meeting.
Thank you, JJ. That does bring us then to the end of our formal meeting agenda. Do we have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Motion to.
A motion and a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye as well. It is so moved. Thank you for attending or watching the Burnsville Parks and Natural Resources Commission meeting.